Hey strangers, before you skip this, let me just say, please don't skip the pre-rolls. Sometimes they're ads, but a lot of times they're me telling you important news about upcoming events. I can't tell you how many times I've had an event that I've talked about on the show and listeners have told me they never heard about it. You gotta listen to the pre-roll. I don't have an advertising budget, so this is where you have to come to get info about events, live shows, conventions, and Patreon news. Plus, you might hear about a podcast I've just discovered that I think you'll enjoy. So come for the show and stay for the pre-roll. Today's pre-roll is brought to you by Grab Bag Collab, the Patreon network for Strange and Unexplained. Grab Bag has everything, from true crime to advice to recap shows, health and wellness, and more. We've got book clubs, happy hours, bonus content, early access to merch and live show tickets, and more. For just $5 a month, you get all the regular shows, and for an extra $3, you get all that, plus Crimes of the Centuries and Strange and Unexplained early and ad-free. So join us over at patreon.com/grabbagcollab for more amazing content. And now, on to the show. How do you solve a decades-old mystery? When time and opinion have solidified what were once dubious connections into cold, hard facts, how do you go back to chisel out the truth? If you know the real truth, is it necessary to be exonerated in order to move on and get some semblance of peace? Is it possible to heal from injustice? Welcome to Strange and Unexplained with me, Daisy Egan. I'm the kind of person who likes to believe in innocent until proven guilty, but I'm also always sure it was the husband who did it. It would take a lot for me to believe that the husband, the one who almost always finds his wife dead, didn't do it. But if that husband has been beaten to the point of sustaining permanent nerve damage and other obvious injuries, and claims to his last breath he didn't do it, and there is another good suspect, I'm willing to break my own rule and maybe, just maybe, give the husband a little benefit of the doubt. A little. I'm not a big fan of injustice, and Lord knows there's a lot of injustice everywhere. Not just the social kind, but also the injustice that happens to individuals, people who get royally screwed by a system that is supposed to operate on the facts. It happens when people lie, or the good guys fail, or shit just goes south. Sometimes it's nobody's fault. Sometimes people just make mistakes. But that doesn't make it okay. Benjamin Franklin once said that it is better that 100 guilty men go free than to have an innocent man be found guilty. I have to agree with him there, for the most part. But sometimes it's hard to know what the truth is, especially when the person controlling the narrative has a score to settle. "29-year-old Dr. Sam Sheppard, his wife Marilyn, 30, and their 7-year-old son Samuel Reese, or Chip as he was called, lived in a very nice lakefront home on Lake Erie in Bay Harbor, an affluent suburb of Cleveland, Ohio. Sam was a doctor, and Marilyn was a stay-at-home mom. The couple met while still in high school in Ohio. She apparently then followed him to Indiana and then Southern California, where he got a doctorate in osteopathic medicine, which from my experience is like Reiki, but requires a doctorate. After they married in 1945, they returned to Ohio, where they bought the home on the lake so Sam could join his brothers in their father's medical practice. The Sheppards were pretty much a Norman Rockwell painting. On the outside, at least. On July 3rd, 1954, Marilyn was 4 months pregnant with her second child and a tad cranky. Her husband had scheduled a party for his hospital colleagues for the next day, the 4th of July, and then told her she'd be hosting. Such was the fate of the 1950s housewife. That night, July 3rd, the next-door neighbors came over for supper. It was a pleasant enough evening, though Sam had had a long day working at the hospital's emergency room, taking a shift away from his usual work as a much sought-after orthopedic and neurological surgeon. Listen, this doesn't matter really, but I had to look up how a dude with a doctorate in osteopathy was performing surgeries. apparently, osteopaths, which is not what they really call themselves anymore, can do their residencies in hospitals to get their physician's license. I am honestly so confused. But also, please don't DM me with explanations. I don't actually care. I just didn't want anyone else to go, wait, he was an osteopath and a surgeon? So, you're welcome, I guess? Okay, so, by the time the neighbors left around 12:30 a.m., Sam was already asleep on the daybed. Marilyn said goodbye to their visitors and locked the front door. At around 5:40 on the morning of the 4th, Sam called his friend Spencer Houck, the town mayor, who lived 2 doors down. Frantic, he told him, "They've killed Marilyn." When Houck and his wife, Estelle, arrived minutes later, it was Estelle who went upstairs to see what Sam had meant. There was blood everywhere. Marilyn was lying in it. The sheets on her matching twin bed were soaked in it. The walls were splattered with it. There was a large splotch of it on the wall near the door. Estelle reached to find Marilyn's pulse. It wasn't there. Apparently, though, she didn't relay this horrible information to Sam. It didn't matter, though. According to Sam's testimony, he had already performed this gruesome task. At trial, he would say, quote, "I was struck down. It seems like I was hit from behind somehow, but had grappled this individual from in front or generally in front of me. I was knocked out. The next thing I knew, I was gathering my senses while coming to a sitting position next to the bed, my feet toward the hallway. I looked at my wife. I believe I took her pulse and felt that she was gone." End quote. At 6 a.m., 20 minutes after Sam called his friend Houck, the police were called. Sam told Fred Drenkin, the first law enforcement officer on the scene, that he woke up when he heard Marilyn call out his name. He then ran up the stairs and could see a large presence in a white shirt standing over his wife just inside their bedroom. But before he could determine who the figure was, he said he was hit from behind and rendered briefly unconscious. When he regained consciousness, he heard a noise downstairs, ran toward it, and saw a man running out the door toward the lake. Later, he would testify, quote, "I believe that I, after that, instinctively or subconsciously ran into my youngster's room next door and somehow determined that he was all right. I'm not sure how I determined this. After that, I thought that I heard a noise downstairs, seemingly in the front eastern portion of the house." End quote. Sam was athletic, in good shape, and clearly was coursing with more than enough adrenaline to catch up with the intruder. The two men wrestled. During the fight, though, Sam got knocked out again. When he awakened this time, he was face down at the rim of the lake, his lower half in the water, his t-shirt missing, and the morning sun beginning to edge over the horizon. Sam's brother, Dr. Richard Sheppard, showed up and confirmed the awful truth, that Marilyn was indeed dead. Without being too graphic, Marilyn had been bashed forcibly in the head 15 times with some kind of hard, curved object, which was not left at the scene. Her pajama pants had been removed and her top pushed up to expose her breasts, suggesting that she'd been sexually assaulted. Specifically, her legs were hanging off the side of the bed so her feet were nearly touching the floor. In fact, her legs had been placed between the slats of the bed frame in such a way that suggested she'd been intentionally pinned down. Seven-year-old Chip was quickly shuffled out of the home, with everyone being careful to shield him from seeing anything upstairs. Sam was taken to the hospital. One side of his face was swollen and bruised. 2 teeth had been chipped. His neck was placed in a brace. There was every indication that he had been in the water a while. His feet were wrinkled and he was hypothermic. Back at the house, nobody was paying much mind to keeping the crime scene from being trampled. What we now consider common sense at a crime scene, not touching everything, using gloves and booties and stuff, wasn't common sense back then. Even something as seemingly obvious as not letting random looky-loos walk around as they pleased apparently didn't occur to the police at the scene. A neighbor who was a Cleveland Brown football star even got into the room and later told people what a bloodbath it had been. I don't know if police were wooed by his celebrity status or just not paying attention. The coroner, Dr. Samuel Gerber, got to the house around 8 a.m. and made note of dried blood on the stairs, smeared on the wall, and on the sliding glass door at the back of the house. Author James Neff wrote in The Wrong Man, a definitive work of the investigation, that whoever opened that door had blood on at least one hand, perhaps from a flowing cut. DNA testing was a long way off back in the 50s, so determining whose blood it wasn't going to be a thing. Dr. Gerber noticed, as had the first cop, that things looked a bit out of order, though kind of neatly disarranged instead of frantically so. Bowling trophies and some file boxes had been handled and broken. Sam's medical bag was open and dumped, and so were some drawers. But nobody had tossed that stuff willy-nilly everywhere, as you might expect, say, home intruders to do. And there was no sign of forced entry. And though the front door had been locked, it's very possible the back sliding glass door, the door that had smeared blood on it, had not. Despite Sam's condition, his beaten face and broken teeth, his hypothermia and shriveled skin on his feet, Dr. Gerber, it seems, felt in his heart that Sam had done it. Knew it. You know, like knew. Strangers, Wild Grain, my favorite and the first ever bake from frozen bread subscription box is back. God, I love bread, And pasta, come on. Pastries? Forget about it. What could be better? I'll tell you what, a monthly box that comes with all three of those things that I can put in my freezer and pop in the oven and have hot and ready in 25 minutes or less. And even better than that, free croissants for life. I'm not great at breakfast, but a hot, flaky croissant right out of the oven with butter and jam? Yes, please. Last week, I made an amazing fresh mushroom sauce that I paired with the delicious fettuccine from Wild Grain. It was a huge hit. There's something about fresh, not dried pasta. It just tastes better. Each box is fully customizable, so if you want to leave out bread or pasta or pastries, you can. If your Nana's visiting from Italy and you want to pretend you made a bunch of pasta from scratch to impress her, order all pasta. No judgment. Live your life. Hosting family and you want your freezer stocked with delicious pastries for breakfast? Do it. Plus, there's the all-new plant-based box for vegan options. For a limited time, you can get $30 off the first box, plus free croissants in every box when you go to wildgrain.com/strange to start your subscription. You heard me, free croissants in every box, and $30 off your first box when you go to wildgrain.com/strange. That's wildgrain.com/strange, or you can use promo code STRANGE at checkout. Turns out, the Norman Rockwell facade of a happy home and family may have just been that, a facade. Sam was not exactly the prime example of fidelity that he'd promised to be when the couple had said their vows 9 years earlier. It's hard to know how Marilyn felt about that. Not every woman cares if her husband steps out, as it were. It would be reported that she didn't mind, really, because she wasn't all that fond of sex after her baby was born. And she'd suffered from postpartum depression, called then the baby blues, which is a really cute term for a condition that frequently leads to suicidal ideation. Plus, she told friends that she and Sam did not have the same expectations about their sex life. Apparently, he was insistent about sex at least once a day. Marilyn said he would race home from the hospital in between appointments or surgeries to make sure he was there just after she had her regular afternoon bath. Gross. She was just not that interested, and honestly, I can't blame her. There are few things less sexy than scheduled, planned, expected sex, unless you're doing a booty call, but this ain't it. Some believe Marilyn was also having affairs, though there isn't much evidence of this. And it does seem Marilyn wasn't thrilled about her husband's extramarital dalliances. She didn't want to be known as the frigid wife whose husband had no choice but to find a warm bed outside the home. She wanted respect. Listen, I didn't know the woman, but I think it's safe to say we all want basic respect and we all deserve it. At the very least, I'm sure she didn't want to be embarrassed. In my rulebook, the first edict about philandering is that nobody should get hurt, which is nearly impossible when it comes to philandering. Ethical non-monogamy maybe, but philandering implies lying. I'm just saying that he was not very discreet about these things, and for that, I'm giving him some heavy side-eye. Stay married or don't. Figure it out or don't. But certainly, if you're going to betray her, don't embarrass her to boot. That's just cruel. Anyway, Dr. Sam might have been a serial dick, but that doesn't make him a murderer. He swore up and down and over that he didn't kill his wife and unborn baby. He also would later say that the last 3 months of their lives together had been the happiest of their marriage. I mean, anyone can say anything, but Marilyn had commented to a friend a few months before her death that she felt like her husband had fallen in love with her all over again. So maybe I'm being hard on him. Maybe I'm not a romantic. Maybe my heart is a cold, shriveled up raisin. My point is their life wasn't exactly all peaches. Whose is? From the get-go, he said that he'd seen a bushy-haired intruder in his house. He'd chased him down and overcame him outside where the two men fought, and he'd been knocked unconscious. And, judging from the injuries to his face and neck, it seemed he, too, was a victim. Unless he beat himself in the face, which is unlikely. Virtually no one, short of Sam's family, believed the intruder's story, least of all the coroner, Dr. Gerber. Like I said, Dr. Gerber knew Sam was guilty. Listen, I'm no coroner, but I'm pretty sure this guy didn't know anything except that a woman had been bludgeoned to death and somehow blood ended up in other parts of the house. Also, I thought the coroner's job was to determine the manner, cause, and time of death, not who done it. Turns out, I thought wrong. Yes, even I, stranger, can get things wrong. It almost never happens, of course. But it turns out that back in the old days, some coroners also led the investigations into the whodunit of it all. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say they probably weren't as thoroughly trained as, say, actual investigators, but honestly, actual investigators didn't seem too thoroughly trained back then either. In fact, apparently, even today, the coroner doesn't need to be too tremendously trained as a medical professional either. They just need to be a doctor of some kind. It's a political position that anyone can run for and get elected to. Everything is fine. Point is, you might not want to find yourself on the wrong side of your local coroner. James Neff suggests there could have been some professional jealousy at play here. He writes, quote, Gerber knew about the Sheppard doctors, but never met any of them in person. Like some in the Cleveland medical establishment, he did not like them. For one, they were osteopaths, a profession that he associated with inferior training and faulty medical science, end quote. It's worth noting, however, that Sheppard had trained and completed an internship in neurosurgery. So, regardless of Gerber's opinions of how well-trained osteopaths are or are not, this particular osteopath clearly had a lot of medical training. Neff continues, quote, Also, the Sheppards were openly ambitious, always calling the newspapers to get free publicity for Bayview Hospital, recounting emergency room heroics and lives saved. With medical reporting in the 1950s pretty much limited to ribbon cuttings at new hospital wings and new cures, newspaper reporters loved the dramatic and easily related news stories of emergency rescues, complete with heroes and happy endings, end quote. Heroes and happy endings has to be the name of a massage parlor somewhere. Also, quick side note for levity, when my editor transcribed this quote, she misspelled heroes as herpes. So I thought Neff was actually saying that journalists of the day wanted stories about herpes and happy endings. Needless to say, I was confused. Herpes and happy endings is not a sentence one ever expects to read or say. Anyway, Quote, MDs felt that grubbing for publicity was unseemly. In fact, earlier that year, Gerber had encountered a Bayview resident doctor and asked if he was part of the Sheppard clan. He replied that he was a resident at Bayview, and Gerber remarked, "I'm going to get them someday." End quote. Probably not the guy you want heading up the investigation into the murder of your wife. Gerber had, by the way, almost immediately appointed himself as the lead on the case. Also, I get professional jealousy, but this is a man's wife and his life. Save your petty jealousies for, like, a strongly worded letter to the head of the hospital calling for him to be fired or something. This feels excessive. Strangers, you know I'm not a cat person. I am an aspiring cat person for sure, though. Still working on my husband over it. I have promised him I will be responsible for cleaning the litter box and with the feeding of our aspirational kitty. And you absolutely know I'll be using Smalls cat food because I know Smalls is made from real ingredients I might find in my own fridge. In fact, veterinarians.org rates Smalls 10 out of 10 for ingredient quality. More than 80% of Smalls users report overall improvement in their cat's health. New York Magazine calls Smalls the best cat food according to veterinarians, while BuzzFeed said, "My cats went completely ballistic for this stuff." My sister's cats love the variety Smalls has, and my sister loves that Smalls isn't stinky like a lot of other wet cat food brands. Plus, she says she's definitely noticed fresher breath and shinier coats. If you have a picky cat, you can try the starter pack to see what flavor they like best. Smalls is so confident your cat will love it, it comes with a 30-day risk-free money-back guarantee. Now is the time to make the switch to Smalls. Head to smalls.com/strange and use promo code STRANGE at checkout for 50% off your first order plus free shipping. That's the best offer you'll find, but you have to use my code STRANGE for 50% off your first order. One last time, that's promo code STRANGE for 50% off your first order plus free shipping. Dr. Gerber quickly announced that the murder weapon had been some kind of surgical instrument. He then arranged for Marilyn's body to be moved to the morgue for autopsy. His next order of business was to visit Sam at the hospital, ostensibly to look him over to see if he had any cuts that might explain the blood on the walls and back door of the house, and to determine if the injuries to his face were real. Sam would later swear Gerber scrutinized his hands at the hospital and found no cuts or wounds. Somehow, though, Gerber wouldn't remember that part, though one would assume he would have been taking notes. He did note that Sam had been fitted with a neck brace and had some pretty serious evidence of facial trauma. Gerber then went back to the house and told detectives now combing the scene and anyone else within earshot that, quote, "It's obvious the doctor did it," end quote. Thanks, Sherlock. He told the detectives to go to the hospital and get Sam's confession. Not to interview him, mind you, to get his confession. Impressive work, Doctor. Marilyn wasn't even cold, and he had already solved the crime. Gerber would later say that he'd appointed himself lead in the investigation because it was taking too long, though 12 hours doesn't seem all that long to me in a murder case. Gerber was actually known to be thorough and fair and deeply committed to the burgeoning world of forensic science. He was, after all, not some Nimrod. He just maybe didn't know how to stay in his own lane. And sure, Sam was a shoo-in for the murderer. Sam's brother, Dr. Richard Sheppard, had put the time of Marilyn's death between 4:40 and 4:45 that morning. But he didn't have the benefit of inspecting the contents of her stomach, which is not a sentence I ever thought I'd say. He was simply judging by the level of rigor he'd seen. Gerber's highly educated deputy coroner, who was a trained pathologist, conducted the autopsy and put Marilyn's time of death between 3:30 and 4:30 that morning. She also confirmed that Marilyn had indeed been 4 months pregnant. But Gerber did some of his own personal doctor math and told reporters her time of death was 3 a.m. I'm not sure what he based that on, especially considering the 2 other experts who'd put her death at half an hour to an hour and 45 minutes later. Back at the hospital, detectives Robert Schottky and Patrick Giraud asked Sam a few questions before informing him that they thought he'd done it. He was appalled. He loved his wife, he said. Stephen Sheppard, another one of Sam's brothers, entered the room to find him beating back the detectives' allegations. Sam's brother quickly shut the whole thing down, telling Sam he needed a lawyer. The detectives had to go. They did not arrest Sam. At least, not yet. Despite Dr. Gerber's insistence and the detective's belief that Dr. Sam Sheppard was guilty of the murder of his wife, without a confession, he was considered innocent, at least technically by the letter of the law. Personal opinion, obviously, was another story, but there just wasn't enough real evidence to indict him. There just wasn't enough there. Detectives hounded Sam for a retelling of the crime. He told his version at the hospital, he walked them through it at the house, recreating his every move. He sketched and then re-sketched what he could remember of the man he'd seen and wrestled with that morning. I hope he was a good portrait artist. If I were asked to draw a portrait of anyone, it would come out looking a lot like if Sloth from the Goonies was a stick figure. They couldn't even get this guy a professional composite sketch artist. Regardless of artistic abilities, Sam's story never changed, which surprised those who thought he did it. Sam's story was the same every time. Liars mess up the small stuff. But Dr. Sam Sheppard was a smart guy. Maybe he was an exception to that rule. But also, there was no clear motive, and it's kinda hard to get a conviction without a motive. Prosecutors don't need to prove motive in courts, mind you, but juries sure like them. The state's lawyers solved that problem by calling it an act of passion, a rage killing, a convenient way to be like, we don't need a motive. But was he actually guilty? Did Dr. Sam Sheppard really just snap and kill his wife? By now, the case tantalized the city, and pretty soon the whole nation was riveted. White upper-middle-class doctors just didn't do this kind of thing in their own lakefront homes with their children in the next room, right? I mean, yes, they do. Anyway. Not long after average Americans took an interest, the international press got wind of the good-looking doctor and the blood-soaked aftermath of his wife's killing. Soon, it was a media frenzy. Remember, Sam had had a habit of stepping out on his wife. And where there are extramarital affairs, there's bound to be someone with a story to tell. Competition for news scoops was real, and it wasn't long before a Cleveland Plain Dealer reporter found one of Dr. Sheppard's former lovers in California, and voila, this case finally had everything. Sex, affluence, a bad boy, a scorned lover, and a dead wife. The hunt was on for more of Dr. Sheppard's conquests in an effort to juice this story up to maximum readership. The Cleveland press, run by a tyrant named Louis Seltzer, veered out of its lane and decided it would be the first to light the torch to start the bonfire that would roast Sheppard. On its front pages, masquerading as coverage, it chided the police and the coroner for not indicting the good doctor. On its front page on July 21st, the headline read, "Why no inquest? Do it now, Dr. Gerber." So, the coroner also led the inquest? Okay. Author Neff quoted John Reese, a colleague of Seltzer's, who claimed Seltzer admitted his righteous and sanctimonious quest for justice was really about selling newspapers. Quote, "The whole murder was pushed. That was for circulation purposes. We were glad to have that circulation." End quote. Think about that next time you think your news source is giving you impartial reporting. Strangers, I just got a box from Quince for my upcoming trip, and I am so jazzed about how soft, comfortable, and gorgeous my new clothes are. I like to pack light, so I need items that are versatile. I got a couple of basic cotton tees, 2 washable silk shirts, a few linen button-downs in blue, green, and black, and some super cute lightweight linen shorts. I even got a gorgeous linen blazer for under $70 and a cute vest to throw over one of those silk t-shirts for less than $40. You cannot find stuff this beautiful and high quality at these prices anywhere else. Believe me, I've looked. Quince is one of my favorite places to go for clothes because everything is high quality, long-lasting, and affordable. That's because Quince partners directly with factories that use ethical and sustainable practices to bring you luxury items at up to 80% less than you'd normally be paying. Traveling is expensive. You don't need to spend a whole lot to look good while you're doing it. With Quince, you can get everything you need in one place and feel good about where you're spending your money. Quince even has luggage. Pack your bags with high-quality essentials from Quince. Go to quince.com/strange for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/strange to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/strange. Gerber decided to stage the requested inquest the day after the fair and balanced story that no doubt followed that salacious headline came out, in front of a public audience at a local school. It was a shit show. Gerber harped on Sam's flagrant womanizing, and Sam lied about it. Not a lot of time and testimony, though, was spent on the actual forensics of the case, which may be because they didn't have much, but more on that later. The crowd, which was largely female, booed and laughed at alternative intervals. Like this was a WWF welterweight bout. True crime has been a popular culture obsession since the dawn of crime. After the public debacle, in which Sam's lawyer was thrown out for objecting too much, Dr. Gerber ruled that Marilyn Sheppard had been the victim of homicide due to injuries inflicted by her husband. Of course, he'd decided that long before the inquest. Those findings, by the way, had not appeared on any of the medical documents in the investigation. Nevertheless, Gerber persisted. His judgment would mean the arrest of Dr. Sam Sheppard. Not long after the inquest, another woman came forward claiming to have slept with the very married Dr. Sheppard, and soon there were 4 more women on record claiming the same. And what was once a murder case became a story about a despicable, well-bred heel who brazenly flaunted his mistresses in front of his young, adoring, and beleaguered pregnant wife. Of course he killed her. In an odd aside, Sheppard once told his lawyer that his flagrant philandering only proved Marilyn had a motive to kill him. He just didn't see Gerber's point. He may have been a douchebag, but at least he was a self-aware douchebag, I guess. Meanwhile, even though Dr. Gerber had made his pronouncement, the Cleveland police were doing their job. They looked at anyone who might have fit the description that Sheppard had given that tragic morning. Detectives had gone through Marilyn's calendar, noting places she frequented, people she'd written checks to, folks she might have met with in the days prior to her death. So too, the forensic team went back and, with the aid of luminol, found several drops of blood in almost every room of the Sheppard home, including in Chip's bedroom. And while DNA testing wasn't a thing back then, they did usually use blood types to try to narrow down suspect lists. For some reason, the blood found in the Sheppard home was not typed to see if it matched Sam or Marilyn or Chip. On July 30th, 3 weeks after Marilyn's death, a passel of reporters and photographers accompanied the police to the home of Sam Sheppard's parents at the Tony Cleveland Yacht Club, where Sam had been staying since the murder. I don't understand why they had a home in a yacht club, but I don't understand most things about rich people. The story of the impending arrest had been leaked to the public, and people were lined up at the private club's gates to watch Dr. Sam Sheppard step out of his parents' home in handcuffs. The whole thing was horrifying to his parents, especially to his mother, who loved her privacy and her place in Cleveland society. Possibly also because it would be mildly embarrassing, at the very least, to have a son accused of bludgeoning his wife to death. Also, I would think hopefully they were horrified that their daughter-in-law had been murdered. But sure, privacy and place in society. Sam then went through a harrowing 3-day-long grilling that he would later describe as, quote, mental torture at its worst. Hour after hour, they shouted at me, accused me, insulted me and members of my family. They tried to trick me by questioning me about facts they knew were not correct. A psychological breakdown was exactly what these people were looking for, end quote. But he didn't break. His family supplied the cash to get him out on a $50,000 bond set for his temporary freedom. A grand jury was impaneled the same day, August 16th. I have to say, I'm very confused about the order in which this whole thing played out. There was an inquest at which he was found responsible for the murder, he was arrested and released on bail, and then a grand jury was called? Turns out, this is how stuff worked in coroner inquest days. The coroner would narrow down the suspect, police would use the guidance to zero in on someone who may or may not have been guilty, and then prosecutors would use all that info to try to convince a grand jury to indict. After that, an actual trial would take place with a new jury. If you think people are tried in the press today, imagine what it was like back then. Anyway, when Sam was indicted for first-degree murder, he was picked up and returned to custody where he would await trial. He'd been out for a little more than a day. And this, stranger, is what we in the business call a cliffhanger. That's where we'll be leaving this episode. But it's not the end of the story. Next time on Strange and Unexplained, Part 2 of the Dr. Sam Sheppard story, Trial by Media. Strange and Unexplained is a production of Three Goose Entertainment with help from Grab Bag Collab. This episode was written by me and Amy Wilson, who also did the research. Editing help from Amber Hunt, and sound engineering and mixing by Henry Lavoie. If you have an idea for an episode, head to our website, strangeandunexplainedpod.com, and fill out the contact form. I will write back. For more amazing content, join us at patreon.com/grabbagcollab, where for just $5 a month, you'll get all the Grab Bag exclusive shows, and for $8 you get those, plus Amber Hunt's Crimes of the Centuries and Strange and Unexplained early and ad-free. Grab Bag is an all-female and non-binary owned profit share network where our contributors get to keep ownership of their shows. We strive to give a platform to those who might not be able to land themselves on a bigger network. Who knows? Maybe you have a podcast idea you'd like to pitch to Grab Bag. We've got live recordings, watch parties, book clubs, and more. There's so much going on over at Grab Bag, you'd wondered if we missed the memo on how capitalism works. Join me on Instagram at SNUPod, Daisy Egan, and Grab Bag Collab, or head to the Facebook page to join in the conversation. If you like the show, please visit a sponsor with our unique code, give us a quick 5-star review, subscribe and download, and tell a friend. If you don't like the show, the name of the podcast is America First with Sebastian Gorka. Stay strange.